The term gangster has been around since the late 1800s. Even though it was derived to connote an individual from a gang, the word is widely used to describe any criminal with associations with a mafia or criminal organization. So throw another shrimp on the barbie and kick back as we delve into 5 of the worst gangsters in Australian history. Starting off the list at number 5 is Joseph Squizzy Taylor, a Melbourne mobster who menacingly terrorized the city during the 20s. Entering the world down under on June 29, 1888 in Brighton, Victoria, Joseph Theodore Leslie Taylor was the second youngest child born to Benjamin and Rosina. His father worked as a coachmaker until the company was sold in 1893. With no job or prospects of making carriages for horses in Brighton, the family was forced to move to a suburb in Melbourne. There in Richmond, he continued to work in a stable until his untimely demise in 1901. Taking the reins, young Taylor began working in the stable just after his father's death to help support the family at the age of 13. He moved up quickly from cleaning and feeding to training horses. Eventually, he became a jockey and tried to race for money. But the horse racing world is much more difficult than he imagined, and soon he started to cause trouble. His first arrest came when he was just 16. This minor offence for insulting behaviour was dropped by the local magistrate, but would lead to a litany of charges and court appearances over the subsequent 2 decades. Just 1 year later, Taylor was arrested again, and this time convicted of his first crime. The 17-year-old boy was sentenced to 21 days imprisonment for stealing a fly-front grey Melton cloth overcoat. It was around this time when he adopted the moniker Squizzy. It's unclear if the nickname was given due to his appearance with his droopy eye, or if it was a family name passed down from his brother, but he accepted his new name with vigour, essentially catapulting his criminal career. After being released from his first stint in prison, Squizzy joined a local larrikin push, or gang. The group of young miscreants terrorised the community with rampant thefts, assaults and throwing missiles. Enjoying the thrill of theft, Squizzy became particularly fond of pickpocketing people in the streets. Operating under the alias Michael McGee in 1908, he was busted at the Ballarat races attempting to lift a gold watch and chain from an unsuspecting punter. He served 2 years in prison for his crime. Shortly after he was freed again, Squizzy shipped off to South Australia to avoid the unwanted attention. Then, in 1911, under the name David Donoghue, he was arrested again for pickpocketing and served 1 year. He jumped over to Christchurch, New Zealand to continue his crimes, but was picked up once more for theft in 1912. During this period, Squizzy managed to settle down with a woman named Dolly Gray. However, instead of becoming calm in his newfound love life, it's said that his beloved wife actually empowered his behaviour and involved herself in several scams to extort married men. Squizzy skyrocketed from there. Advancing from petty theft, he upgraded his criminal status when he teamed up with Harold Bush Thompson in 1913. That January, a commercial traveller employed by McRobertson's confectioners, Arthur Trotter, was strolling the streets with his wife and child. He was shot and killed in front of his family and robbed of £200 from his coat pocket. Thompson was arrested and tried for the crime but was found not guilty. Squizzy squeezed by without any arrest but was highly suspected of his role as an accomplice. Everything escalated from that point, and in 1916 Squizzy and his partner, John Williamson, were arrested for the murder of William Patrick Haynes. He was a 21-year-old taxi driver who was hired for an early morning pickup by the diabolical duo. They intended to take a taxi to rob a bank manager transferring money, but were unsuccessful in their attempt. Haynes was found on the floor of his car a couple of days later with multiple gunshots to his head and torso. While the 2 men managed to evade a murder conviction, they were charged and imprisoned for vagrancy and obstruction. While in prison, his push that he ran with his partner, two-up King Henry Stokes, became embroiled in a feud with another local gang, beginning the Fitzroy vendetta. The battle between the 2 pushes persisted for several months, with both sides losing lots of members. The entire situation developed over a diamond heist that went wrong after its success. Apparently, several members felt shorted after the split and wanted what was owed. They decided to target Squizzy's wife, Dolly, and drugged her one night when she was out partying. Not only did they steal £200 from her purse, they also violated her in the process. Squizzy quickly reacted. Edward Ted Whiting was the first victim. Found in his home a few days later, Whiting was shot 6 times in the head. Miraculously, he survived from what the newspapers would call an extremely thick skull. Another member was shot 7 times and killed a few days later. The gang took one more shot at Whiting, unloading several rounds into his home, but they missed that time and he emerged unscathed. The feud finally died down when Squizzy was arrested that summer for a shooting incident. After his release, he started a slew of burglaries in 1920 that lasted until the middle of 1921. His theft spree was stopped in June when he was caught red-handed at a bond warehouse. Squizzy posted bail at £600 and vanished, though. A local manhunt ensued. Adding to the issues, a gunner for the Fitzroy gang, Joseph Lennox Cotter, was pushing for power with the leader on the run and unable to present himself in person. Cotter filled a gambling den with bullets in his protest. He also fought another member at a local horse race which escalated to a shooting that killed the man several days later. Squizzy stayed on the run for almost 2 years. The police came close one time in his apprehension but failed to catch the car. Eventually, as he promised in his letters to the newspaper, Squizzy turned himself into the authorities in September of 1922. On the night before his trial, Squizzy arrived at a local bar to enjoy his last night of freedom as he exited his vehicle. Several shots rang out. He was hit in the leg. Cotter was arrested for the attempted murder but was released due to lack of evidence. However, he did serve 2 years for possession of an illegal firearm. Squizzy limped into the courtroom on the day of his trial and told the jury his extravagant story. He convinced the jury that he was entwined in a fight that led him to hide in the warehouse. They were tricked into a mistrial that required another attempt. He was found not guilty in his retrial. But his luck eventually ran out. Though he managed to dodge the law many times, his underworld lifestyle caught up to him. On October 27, 1927, Squizzy Taylor met up with John Snowy Cutmore, a rival gangster, at a house in Berkeley Street, Carlton. The 2 men agreed to the meeting to settle a dispute dating back to the Fitzroy vendetta. During the argument, words transformed into bullets, and the 2 unleashed hell on each other in the middle of the road. Squizzy was shot several times and taken to St. Vincent's Hospital, where he later died. Cotter also died from his wounds. Keith Faure. A name whispered in the shadows, a chill down the spine of Melbourne. His story is one of transformation, from an innocent child to a figure of fear and infamy. But before the darkness consumed him, he was just a boy, born under a heavy sky in the working-class suburbs. The environment around him was a breeding ground for despair, a place where dreams were often stifled before they could even take root. His childhood was unremarkable, a bleak landscape of poverty and neglect. Days were spent wandering through empty playgrounds and crumbling streets, where the laughter of children was a rare sound. School held no allure, the streets offering a more tempting education. The graffiti-covered walls told stories of survival, of battles fought and lost, and of a community struggling to hold on. Petty theft escalated to violence, a darkness blooming in his eyes. What started as minor infractions soon grew into more serious crimes, each act pulling him deeper into a world from which there was no easy escape. Faure found solace in the company of other lost souls, drifting towards the city's underbelly. These were individuals who, like him, had been cast aside by society, finding camaraderie in their shared sense of abandonment. The thrill of danger, the allure of easy money, it all proved too seductive. Each clandestine meeting, each risky venture added to the adrenaline rush that had become his new normal. By his early 20s, Faure had left his childhood behind, trading the grey streets of the suburbs for the neon-lit shadows of Melbourne's criminal underworld. The city at night was a different beast, one that offered both opportunity and peril in equal measure. A monster was about to be unleashed. The seeds of darkness planted in his youth had taken root, and the world was about to witness the full bloom of his transformation. Melbourne's underbelly was a world of its own, smoky card games, illicit deals and whispers of violence. Faure, with his cold eyes and quick temper, fit right in. He started small, running errands for local gangsters, his brutality quickly marking him as someone to be feared. Debt collection, protection rackets, Faure excelled at the dirty work. He rose through the ranks, his loyalty bought with blood and fear. The lines between right and wrong blurred, swallowed by the city's shadows. Soon, whispers of a new force in the underworld reached the police. a force they would come to know as the Riverside Ripper. The Riverside Ripper, a name that would soon become synonymous with fear and dread in the hearts of Melbourne's residents. The first bodies surfaced on a cold, misty morning, shrouded in an eerie silence that seemed to echo the city's collective gasp. A young woman discarded by the Yarra River, her lifeless eyes staring into the fog as if seeking answers that would never come. The brutality of the murder sent shockwaves through the city, a grim reminder of the darkness lurking beneath the surface of everyday life. Multiple stab wounds inflicted with a savage fury marked the victim, each one a testament to the killer's relentless rage. Her name was Sarah, a name soon to be joined by others, each one a tragic entry in the Riverside Ripper's growing list of victims. A second body emerged days later, then another, each discovery deepening the city's despair and the police's determination to catch the killer. The pattern was chillingly familiar. Young women brutally murdered, their bodies dumped near the river, as if the water could wash away the horror. The press had a field day, christening the unknown assailant the Riverside Ripper, a name that would haunt headlines and conversations alike. Fear gripped Melbourne, the city holding its breath, waiting for the next victim, each resident wondering if the nightmare would ever end, or if the Ripper would strike again. The police were baffled. The Ripper was a phantom, leaving no trace behind but death. The only clues were the victims themselves and the brutal method of their demise. Whispers in the criminal underworld hinted at Faure's involvement, his name mentioned with a mix of fear and respect. But concrete evidence remained elusive. Detectives worked tirelessly, chasing shadows and rumours. The pressure mounted, the city demanding answers, demanding justice for the victims. The investigation became an obsession, consuming the lives of those tasked with catching the monster lurking in their midst. Detective John Riley, a seasoned veteran with a haunted look in his eyes, led the investigation. He knew the streets, knew the darkness that thrived within them. Riley and his team followed every lead, every whisper. They interrogated informants, piecing together Faure's movements, his connections. The net was closing in. Faure, sensing the pressure, grew more reckless. His arrogance, his belief that he was untouchable, blinded him to the danger he was in. The game of cat and mouse intensified, each side aware that one wrong move would determine the outcome. As the body count rose, so did the city's fear. The once vibrant streets of Melbourne were now shrouded in a palpable sense of dread. Mothers clutched their daughters closer. Whispers of the Ripper followed them like a curse. The city felt vulnerable, held hostage by an unseen terror. The media frenzy reached fever pitch. Every new development splashed across the front pages. The Ripper became a morbid obsession, his crimes a macabre spectacle. Melbourne, once a beacon of hope and prosperity, was now defined by the darkness that stalked its streets. The walls close in. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A small-time crook, desperate to save his own skin, offered information about Faure. He revealed details about a blood-stained knife hidden in a derelict warehouse, a knife that matched the Ripper's MO. It was the evidence Riley needed. Armed with a warrant, Riley and his team descended upon the warehouse. The raid was swift, the evidence undeniable. The knife, still bearing traces of the victim's blood, was found. For the first time, Keith Faure had somewhere to run, nowhere to hide. The walls were closing in. Justice served? The trial was a media circus. Reporters and spectators alike packed the courtroom, eager to catch a glimpse of the monster who had terrorized their city. The evidence against Faure was overwhelming. The blood on the knife, witness testimonies from the underworld, it all pointed to his guilt. Throughout the trial, Faure remained defiant, his cold eyes betraying no emotion. He pleaded not guilty, his arrogance unwavering until the very end. The jury deliberated for days before returning with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Faure was sentenced to life in prison, his reign of terror finally over. Imprisoned for life, Keith Faure disappeared from the public eye, his name becoming synonymous with evil. The city he terrorized slowly began to heal. Inside the cold grey walls of the prison, Faure remained an enigma. He was a model prisoner, quiet, detached, his true nature hidden behind a mask of indifference. Some whispered that he found solace in religion, repenting for his sins. Others believed he enjoyed the notoriety, the fear he inspired even behind bars. Whatever the truth, Keith Faure remained a prisoner of his own darkness, forever marked by the horrors he had unleashed upon Melbourne. Years passed, but the memory of Keith Faure and his reign of terror continued to haunt Melbourne. His name became synonymous with fear, a ghost story whispered among the city's residents. The scars he left on the city ran deep. Every corner, every alley seemed to hold a memory of his dark deeds, a silent witness to the horrors that once unfolded. The families of his victims struggled to rebuild their lives, forever marked by the loss and pain he inflicted. Their grief was a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the cruelty that one man could unleash.
Ready for a healthier life? Contact Pure Home 365. Our water and air purification systems are the only products that remove up to 99.9% of all contaminants and toxins that we breathe and drink. So call 904-386-3816 or scan the QR code to schedule your free consultation with one of our experts. We'll discuss the details about the contaminants in your water like lead, chlorine, and even arsenic, then provide you with a curated solution based on your family's needs to give you the cleanest cooking, bathing, and drinking water throughout your home. So call Pure Home 365 at 904-386-3816 or scan the QR code for your free consultation. Our friendly and knowledgeable staff awaits. Pure Home 365, helping people live longer, healthier lives.
Carl Williams was born in Melbourne in 1970. His childhood was troubled, marked by poverty and domestic violence. He grew up in the tough suburbs of Melbourne's north, surrounded by crime and social decay. These early experiences would shape him, setting him on a dark path. Williams dropped out of school early and drifted into petty crime. He was drawn to the underworld's allure of easy money and power. He started small, with burglaries and car theft, but his ambition was much greater. He craved the respect and notoriety that came with being a major player in the criminal underworld. Williams saw an opportunity in the burgeoning drug trade. He began dealing marijuana, quickly graduating to amphetamines. His ruthlessness and hustle set him apart. He was willing to do whatever it took to get ahead, even if it meant resorting to violence. This was the start of his bloody ascent to the top of Melbourne's underworld. By the late 1990s, Carl Williams was a major player in Melbourne's amphetamine trade. He controlled a vast network of dealers and manufacturers, flooding the city with narcotics. He amassed significant wealth, flaunting his ill-gotten gains with luxury cars and expensive clothes. Williams' rise to power was not without its challenges. He made enemies, rivals who envied his success and wanted a piece of his empire. The underworld operates on a code of loyalty and betrayal, and Williams was not afraid to cross the line. He was suspected of several murders, eliminating those who threatened his business or stood in his way. One such rival was Alphonse Gangitano, a notorious gangster known for his volatile temper. Gangitano's death, a brutal shooting in his own home, sent shockwaves through Melbourne's underworld. While Williams was never charged, many believed he was responsible, having orchestrated the hit to remove a dangerous competitor. As Williams's power grew, so did the violence surrounding him. Melbourne became a battleground, with shootings and bombings becoming commonplace. The police were struggling to contain the escalating conflict, dubbed by the media as the Gangland War. One of the most brazen attacks attributed to Williams was the murder of Jason Moran. Moran, a key player in the rival Moran family, was shot dead in front of his children at a suburban football clinic. The cold-blooded execution sent shockwaves through the city, highlighting the indiscriminate brutality of the Gangland War. The police believed Williams ordered the hit on Moran as retaliation for a previous attempt on his own life. This marked a turning point in the conflict, escalating the violence to unprecedented levels. The streets of Melbourne were no longer safe, with innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire. The Moran family was Williams's main adversary in the Melbourne underworld. Led by Louis Moran, a seasoned criminal, the family controlled a significant portion of the drug trade and had a long history of violence. The feud between Williams and the Morans was fueled by a toxic mix of rivalry, revenge, and a struggle for control of the drug trade. Each side blamed the other for previous attacks, and the cycle of violence continued to escalate. The murders of Jason Moran and later his half-brother Mark Moran, gunned down in his car, were major blows to the family. These killings cemented Williams's reputation as the most ruthless gangster in Melbourne, but they also made him a marked man, a prime target for revenge. The body count continued to rise as the Gangland War raged on. Williams and his associates were linked to a string of unsolved murders, their victims often rivals or those suspected of being informants. Among those killed were Lewis Kane, a close associate of Williams, and Graham the Munster Kinneberg, a veteran criminal and close friend of the Moran family. Both men were shot dead in separate incidents, their murders sending a clear message. Anyone associated with either side of the conflict was a target. The police were under immense pressure to stop the bloodshed. They formed a special task force dedicated to investigating the gangland killings and bringing those responsible to justice. However, Williams and his crew operated with a chilling efficiency, leaving few clues and relying on fear and intimidation to silence potential witnesses. The code of silence was strong in the underworld, but even the threat of death couldn't always buy loyalty. Some witnesses, motivated by fear or a desire to escape the life of crime, were willing to cooperate with the police. One such witness was Nicola Gobbo, a former girlfriend of Williams's associate, who provided crucial information about the gangland killings. Her testimony, along with other evidence gathered by the police, would eventually prove instrumental in bringing down Williams and his empire. The use of informants was a dangerous game, however. Gobbo herself was living under constant threat, forced to live a life in hiding to avoid becoming another victim of the gangland war. Her story highlighted the high stakes and the human cost of the conflict that had gripped Melbourne. In 2007, Carl Williams was finally brought to justice. He was convicted of the murders of Jason Moran, Louis Moran, and Louis Kane, largely based on the testimony of Nicola Gobbo and other secret witnesses. Williams's reign continues. Despite being a prime suspect in several murders, Williams remained a free man for years. He continued to run his drug empire from behind bars, using smuggled phones to communicate with his associates on the outside. Williams's ability to exert control from prison was a testament to his power and the reach of his criminal network. It also highlighted the challenges faced by law enforcement in tackling organized crime. Even behind bars, Williams was a dangerous and influential figure. Williams was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The conviction was a major victory for the police and brought a sense of relief to a city terrorized by years of gangland violence. However, the case also raised serious questions about the use of informants and the ethical boundaries crossed in the pursuit of justice. For the families of Williams's victims, the conviction brought a sense of closure, but it could never erase the pain and loss they had endured. The legacy of the gangland war would continue to haunt Melbourne for years to come. Carl Williams's reign of terror ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. In 2010, he was brutally murdered in Barwon Prison, bludgeoned to death with an exercise bike seat by a fellow inmate. The murder sent shockwaves through the prison system and the underworld alike. While there was speculation about the motive for the killing, it was widely believed to be a contract hit, ordered by rivals seeking revenge for Williams's past crimes. Williams's death, in the same brutal fashion as many of his victims, served as a grim reminder of the cycle of violence that permeated the criminal underworld. It also highlighted the challenges of containing violence even within the supposedly secure walls of a maximum security prison. The Melbourne gangland war left an indelible mark on the city. It exposed the dark underbelly of Australian society, shattering the illusion of a peaceful and safe nation. The violence had a profound impact on the lives of those involved, both directly and indirectly. The war also led to significant changes in law enforcement, with increased resources and powers given to police to combat organized crime. However, the legacy of the violence continued to resonate, serving as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked greed, power, and the devastating consequences of choosing a life of crime.
Rivalry has ruled the world since the beginning of mankind. From the need for survival to raw power and greed, people have fought, stolen, and even killed to get ahead. In the underbelly of Australia, the struggle for control in Sydney led to the downfall of the boss of the Parrish crime family. Let's delve into the life of Anthony Parrish, a man who murdered his way to the top, just to have it all crumble away despite threatening and intimidating witnesses and jurors. Parrish was no ordinary criminal. He was a puppet master pulling the strings of a vast criminal empire built on drugs, violence, and fear. His ruthlessness knew no bounds, his ambition insatiable. It's a journey into the heart of darkness, a glimpse into the mind of a man who lived and breathed crime. Prepare yourself, for the truth is often more chilling than fiction. Anthony Parrish's descent into darkness wasn't sudden. It was a slow, insidious creep, like a vine gradually choking its host. His early life hinted at the darkness to come. Petty thefts, minor assaults, small acts of rebellion that escalated over time. He craved power, respect, and most importantly, wealth. The world, in his eyes, owed him. The drug trade beckoned, a quick and dangerous path to the top. Parrish dove in headfirst, his ambition a runaway train. He started small, a street dealer, learning the ropes, building connections, but Parrish was destined for bigger things. He had a knack for violence, an aura of intimidation that commanded respect. He quickly rose through the ranks, his ruthlessness surpassing his superiors. The streets became his classroom, violence his teacher. By the time authorities took notice, Parrish was already a force to be reckoned with. The drug trade became Parrish's kingdom. He ruled with an iron fist, his reach extending across New South Wales. Cocaine, heroin, amphetamines, Parrish trafficked it all. His network, a tangled web of loyal lieutenants, corrupt officials and terrified informants, ensured a steady flow of narcotics and cash. Violence was Parrish's currency. He used it liberally to eliminate rivals, silence threats and maintain control. Those who crossed him disappeared, their fates whispered in hushed tones. Fear was his most potent weapon, more effective than any gun or knife. It kept his operation running smoothly, his enemies at bay, and the authorities always a step behind. Parrish thrived on the chaos he created, his empire a monument to his ambition and ruthlessness. But every empire eventually crumbles, and Parrish's reign of terror was no different. The true cost of Parrish's empire was measured in lives lost, families shattered, and communities held hostage by fear. Victims, both direct and indirect, littered his path to power. There was the young woman, a drug mule who knew too much, found floating in a river, her body riddled with bullet holes. A rival dealer, his body discovered in a shallow grave, his face disfigured beyond recognition. And the innocent bystanders, caught in the crossfire of Parrish's violent world, their lives extinguished in a heartbeat. Each victim had a story, a life cut tragically short. Their stories served as a chilling reminder of the human cost of Parrish's ambition. Behind the headlines, the statistics and the sensationalism were real people, their lives forever altered by the actions of one man and his insatiable thirst for power. They lived with the pain, the loss and the fear that justice may never be served. Violence was a language Anthony Parrish spoke fluently, and his tools were as varied as his victims. Guns, knives and blunt objects all played a part in his reign of terror. Each weapon left its own signature, a chilling testament to the brutality of his crimes. Handguns, favoured for their efficiency and silence, were often used for executions, a single bullet to the head silencing any opposition. Knives, brutal and personal, left a gruesome reminder of Parrish's reach. Blunt objects, readily available and easily disposed of, were the tools of choice for quick and brutal assaults. The weapons themselves were mere instruments, extensions of Parrish's will. It was his cold-blooded indifference, his willingness to inflict pain and suffering that made them truly terrifying. No criminal mastermind operates in a vacuum. Anthony Parrish was no different. He surrounded himself with a loyal and equally ruthless crew, each member playing a specific role in his criminal orchestra. There was his brother, Andrew, a volatile and unpredictable enforcer, his loyalty to Anthony absolute. And then there was Matthew Lawton, the cunning strategist, the brains behind Parrish's intricate drug operations. And let's not forget the corrupt officials, the police officers and politicians, their pockets lined with Parrish's dirty money, their silence ensuring his continued freedom. This network of accomplices bound by greed, fear and ambition enabled Parrish's rise to power. They were the cogs in his machine, the instruments of his will, and they would all share in his eventual downfall. For years, Anthony Parrish operated with impunity, his web of influence seemingly impenetrable. But the walls were closing in. The police, frustrated by dead ends and intimidated witnesses, formed a dedicated task force. Operation Longhorn, they called it, a testament to their determination to bring Parrish down. They worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, cultivating informants, and slowly piecing together the puzzle of Parrish's vast criminal enterprise. A lucky break came in the form of a disgruntled associate, his loyalty shaken by Parrish's increasingly erratic behaviour. He turned informant, providing crucial details about Parrish's operations, his associates, and the location of a hidden stash of drugs and weapons. The net was closing in. A carefully planned raid on Parrish's hideout yielded a treasure trove of evidence, drugs, weapons, and most importantly, the damning testimony of several key associates who agreed to cooperate in exchange for leniency. Anthony Parrish, the seemingly untouchable kingpin, was finally within reach of the law. The trial of Anthony Parrish was a media spectacle, a public airing of the dark underbelly of New South Wales. The prosecution, armed with a mountain of evidence and a string of witnesses eager to testify against their former boss, presented a compelling case. Parrish, arrogant and defiant to the end, maintained his innocence, claiming to be a victim of circumstance, a pawn in a larger game. The jury didn't buy it. After weeks of testimony, they returned a guilty verdict on multiple counts of drug trafficking, conspiracy and murder. The judge, his voice devoid of emotion, sentenced Parrish to life in prison, ensuring that the mastermind of so much pain and suffering would spend the rest of his days behind bars. Justice had been served, but the scars of Parrish's crimes would linger long after the gavel fell. The impact of Anthony Parrish's crimes extended far beyond the courtroom. His reign of terror left an indelible mark on the communities he terrorized, the families he shattered and the lives he forever altered. The drug trade, fueled by Parrish's ambition, continued to plague the streets, claiming new victims every day. The families of his victims, haunted by the loss of their loved ones, struggled to rebuild their lives, forever burdened by the question of why. Creating a gang is as simple as gathering 2 or more people to perform atrocities. Meet the married couple who tortured and terrorized the town, David and Catherine Burney. A troubled beginning marks David Burney's early years. Born into a world where hope was a rare commodity, his life was a constant struggle against the harsh realities of his environment. Born in 1951 in Australia, his childhood was a harsh landscape of poverty and neglect. The Burney family was entrenched in a cycle of destitution, with little opportunity for escape. His family lived in squalor in the slums of Perth. The dilapidated houses and unkempt streets were a daily reminder of their social standing. Whispers followed them, branding them as the disgrace of the neighbourhood. The Burneys were often the subject of gossip, their every move scrutinised by those around them. Young David became an outcast, bullied and ostracised by his peers. His shabby appearance and the stigma attached to his family made him an easy target for ridicule. He found solace in solitude, retreating into a world of dark fantasies. These fantasies became his escape, a place where he could exert control and power, unlike his real life. His teenage years offered little reprieve. The bullying continued and his academic performance suffered, further isolating him from his peers. David struggled to hold down jobs, his social awkwardness a constant barrier. He moved from one menial job to another, never finding a place where he truly fit in. He developed a fascination with the macabre, collecting pornography and obsessing over stories of violence against women. This dark interest began to consume him, shaping his worldview in disturbing ways. This burgeoning darkness hinted at the monster he would become. His fantasies grew more violent and elaborate, a precursor to the real-life horrors he would later commit. By his early 20s, David was no stranger to the law. His criminal record began to grow, each entry a testament to his escalating deviance. He had a string of arrests for petty theft, indecent exposure, and animal cruelty. These early crimes were a clear indication of his disregard for societal norms and the well-being of others. Each brush with authority seemed to solidify his descent into depravity. Rather than deter him, these encounters only fueled his rebellious nature and deepened his antisocial tendencies. His troubled past laid the foundation for the horrors he would later inflict. The seeds of his future crimes were sown in the fertile ground of his early experiences. The seeds of evil had been sown. As he grew older, these seeds would take root and flourish, leading to a psychological descent that would shock the world. The environment of his childhood home, with its empty playgrounds and broken windows, mirrored the emptiness and brokenness within him. It was a place devoid of joy, where dreams were stifled before they could even begin. His family relationships were strained, marked by conflict and a lack of emotional support. This lack of a nurturing environment further pushed David into his own dark world. As a young boy, David often appeared lost in thought, his mind wandering to places unknown to those around him. These moments of introspection were the early signs of his detachment from reality. At school, he was a ghost, present in body but absent in spirit. The empty classrooms and hallways echoed his sense of isolation and abandonment. His early criminal activities were cries for attention, a desperate attempt to assert his presence in a world that seemed indifferent to his existence. The police station became a familiar place, a grim reminder of his growing notoriety. Mugshots and police records chronicled his journey into darkness, each photograph capturing a moment in his descent. These images would later serve as haunting reminders of the boy who lost his way. In the reflection of a broken mirror, David saw a fragmented image of himself, a symbol of his fractured psyche. This brokenness would eventually manifest in ways that would leave an indelible mark on history. In 1986, a chance encounter changed everything. David Burney met Catherine Harrison, a recently divorced mother of 7. Catherine, trapped in an unhappy marriage for years, was drawn to David's quiet intensity. She saw a misunderstood soul, someone she could fix. Their connection was instant and intense. Catherine Burney David, in me, saw an opportunity. He quickly established himself as the dominant figure in our relationship. He exerted control, manipulating me to his will. I was starved for affection and validation, so I readily submitted. I embraced his dark desires, becoming a willing participant in his twisted fantasies. Their relationship was built on a foundation of domination and control. David, with his history of violence and deviance, found in Catherine a willing accomplice. She, in turn, seemed to relish her role, her own darkness blossoming under his influence. Together, they embarked on a path that would lead them to unimaginable depths of depravity. The nightmare began on October 6th, 1986. It was a night like any other, with the city of Perth cloaked in darkness, the streets illuminated only by the occasional streetlight and the headlights of passing cars. Mary Nielsen, a vibrant 22-year-old, was walking home from a night out with friends. She had spent the evening laughing and enjoying herself, unaware of the sinister fate that awaited her just a few blocks away. As she made her way home, a car pulled up alongside her. The vehicle seemed out of place in the quiet neighborhood, its engine purring ominously in the still night air. Inside the car sat David and Catherine Burney, a couple whose outward appearance gave no hint of the darkness within. They had been prowling the streets, searching for their next victim. David, with practiced charm and a disarming smile, leaned out of the window and asked Mary for directions. His voice was smooth, almost soothing, as he lured her closer to the car. As Mary approached, thinking she was helping a lost driver, Catherine lunged from the passenger seat, grabbing her with a force that took her breath away. In an instant, Mary was pulled inside the car, her world turned upside down. Mary struggled desperately, her heart pounding in her chest. She kicked and screamed, but her efforts were futile against the combined strength of her captors. David quickly bound and gagged her, silencing her screams and rendering her helpless. The car sped off into the night, leaving behind the quiet streets and any hope of immediate rescue. They drove her to their home, a nondescript house in the Perth suburb of Moorhouse. From the outside, it looked like any other house on the block, but inside, it was a place of nightmares. Inside the house, a terrifying ordeal awaited Mary. The walls seemed to close in on her as she was dragged through the dimly lit rooms, each step taking her further from freedom. She was chained to a bed in a small, sparsely furnished room. The air was thick with the scent of fear and despair, and the silence was broken only by her muffled sobs. Over the next several days, she endured unimaginable horrors at the hands of her captors. Each moment was a new torment, each hour a test of her will to survive. David, fueled by his twisted desires, subjected her to repeated sexual assaults. His cruelty knew no bounds, and he took pleasure in her suffering. Catherine, once a seemingly ordinary housewife, participated in the abuse. Her transformation from a mundane existence to a life of crime was complete, and she revelled in the power she held over Mary. Their true natures had been revealed. The facade of normalcy they had maintained for so long was shattered, exposing the monsters beneath. They chained their first victim to a bed in a small, bare room. The walls were cold and unfeeling, and the darkness seemed to seep from the couple. Over the next several days, she endured horrors she couldn't have imagined. Each day was a new nightmare, each night a new terror. David assaulted her repeatedly, and Catherine, who seemed so ordinary, joined in the abuse. Their cruelty was beyond comprehension, and the woman felt her hope slipping away with each passing moment. Their true natures were terrifying. The masks they wore in public had been stripped away, revealing the darkness that lay beneath. She was trapped in their twisted world, a prisoner of their depravity. Mary's disappearance went largely unnoticed. She was a young woman living alone, and her absence at first didn't raise alarm bells. In a bustling city, it's not uncommon for people to go missing without immediate concern. Friends and acquaintances might assume she had simply moved away or was taking some time for herself. This sense of anonymity and isolation in the city worked in favour of David and Catherine Burney. They felt emboldened by the lack of immediate attention to Mary's disappearance. It fueled their sense of power and control, making them crave another victim to satisfy their dark desires. The Burnies' twisted minds were already plotting their next move. They were on the lookout for someone who would be easy to overpower, someone whose absence might not be immediately noticed. Their eyes soon fell upon Susanna Candy, a 15-year-old schoolgirl. Susanna was a bright and cheerful girl, full of life and dreams. She was walking home from her part-time job, a routine she had done countless times before. Little did she know that this ordinary evening would take a horrifying turn. As Susanna made her way home, the Burnies spotted her. They saw an opportunity and decided to strike. David, with his manipulative charm, approached her under the guise of needing directions. Susanna, being the kind and trusting person she was, didn't hesitate to help. She had no reason to suspect that the man asking for directions had sinister intentions. David's ruse worked perfectly, and Susanna fell right into their trap. As she tried to assist David, Catherine emerged from the shadows. Together they overpowered Susanna, binding her and forcing her into their vehicle. The young girl was terrified, but her cries for help went unheard in the desolate street. Susanna was driven to the house on Moorhouse Street, a place that would become her prison. The Burnies had meticulously planned their actions, ensuring that there would be no escape for their victim. Once inside the house, Susanna's nightmare truly began. The Burnies subjected her to days of brutal torture, their cruelty knowing no bounds. They revelled in her pain and suffering, their sadistic desires growing with each passing moment. David, his bloodlust insatiable, eventually decided that Susanna's time had come. He strangled her to death, ending her young life in a moment of sheer brutality. Catherine, ever the accomplice, assisted in disposing of the body. They buried Susanna in a shallow grave in the state forest, hoping that her remains would never be found. The Burnies believed they'd covered their tracks well, but the weight of their actions was beginning to take its toll. With each murder, David and Catherine's transformation into cold-blooded killers became more apparent. They had crossed a line, and there would be no turning back. Their humanity was slipping away, replaced by a monstrous desire for control and domination. The Burnies' actions had set them on a path of no return. They had become monsters, their souls tainted by the blood of their innocent victims. The city, unaware of the horrors lurking in its midst, continued on, oblivious to the darkness that had taken root. She was just walking home from her part-time job when they approached me. It was a normal evening, and she had no reason to be afraid. But then everything changed in an instant. David asked for directions, and before the young woman knew it, she was overpowered and bound. The fear and confusion were overwhelming. She couldn't understand why this was happening to her. The horrors that followed were beyond comprehension. The pain, the terror, the helplessness, it was a nightmare from which I couldn't wake. David and Catherine showed no mercy, their cruelty knowing no bounds. David strangled her after days of brutal torture, and Catherine helped bury the body in a shallow grave. They had taken everything, her future, her dreams, and for what? Their own twisted pleasure. They had truly become monsters. The Burnies' descent into darkness was complete, and the city would never be the same again. The memory of their victims would haunt the streets, a chilling reminder of the evil that can lurk behind ordinary facades. After decades of torment, the two were finally caught and tried for their crimes. David pleaded guilty to 4 of the murders, claiming it was the least he could do for the victims' families. He died in prison on October 7, 2005. Catherine is the 3rd woman to be refused parole for life and is still serving her sentence.